I've stated in the past many times that I'm a big fan of Blumhouse when it comes to horror, thriller, entertainment productions. They've made a lot of projects that I feel have really been surreal watches. But there's also been some mediocre releases that I haven't forgotten about. And I would say in regard to past productions they've made, my experience in viewing their more politically and socially adjacent horror fare has not fared the best. From what I've seen, that's the case with they/them. Now, film is subjective. For, some people might be entertained by a project and enthralled by them, others maybe not so much. The general pool of reviews that I've seen for this movie happen to be negative, from viewers and critics. So, I don't know. But in my experience, well, there's been a whole lot of setup in regard to a good picture from Blumhouse. I think largely a Black Christmas with this. And for those of you who follow this channel and maybe saw my reaction to that original first trailer, you know how spellbound I was by that movie. I thought the marketing was ingenious. In regard to, hey, let's make a Christmas-themed horror film. Of course, reflective, at least in certain capacities, turned out to not really be any way a faithful adaptation or remake. But in consideration, Black Christmas being a revered... When did it come out? Like 1974 or something like that? I forget. It was like a way old historic slasher, but it's a revered picture, right? You think about Black Christmas, you're like, okay, let's see a Christmas-themed horror movie. And the way that the film was advertised in regard to utilizing Christmas tunes as... with the horror nature, I was like, man, this is so unique and I love it. It was ingenious marketing. The film, though, I had no idea going in. The headlines certainly stated a lot, that it was a fiercely feminist movie, and that was way over the top, to the point that it was like, okay, I can't even take this film seriously. The breaking point was that song, the frat house one. I was like, at that point, it was like, this is not going to be good. And then ever since, you're like, yeah, this is comically bad. It's not a good film in any way. And again, it was trying to be a socially conscious film, or you could say offering social commentary, in that conversations surrounding Me Too and modern day feminism are particularly relevant to our society. And while I am open to social commentary, and I do, keep an open mind in consideration, especially if, because I want a good horror experience, the film was like, the subtlety of the obvious and poorly, in no way nuanced delivery was like having an anvil dropped on your head from 5 stories above you. It was such a dumb movie, and it was poorly made, not a good horror film, and, in my opinion. So when I consider Blumhouse, I think back to Black Christmas in regard to looking at a project that perhaps is trying to be socially aware. Of course, for those of you who are familiar with this title, you're probably already aware of why I'm making this connection. But again, like I said, I'm open to social commentary. It just needs to be nuanced, balanced, and well-delivered. And Black Christmas was not a good example. That seems to be the vibe I'm getting with they/them as its title. At first I thought it was they, them, and it's like, okay, the social commentary angle to this is pretty obvious. I'm sure I don't need to read the synopsis, but to give you a general background here, if you're not familiar with this movie, this is what it says according to IMDb for what you can expect. A group of teenagers at an LGBTQ plus conversion camp endures unsettling psychological techniques while being stalked by a mysterious masked killer. So you think of at least a couple elements here in regard to potential. This is a Blumhouse movie, and again, the general fare from what I've seen from them, I've liked. For example, let's say Halloween. I love their Halloween reboot. It's such a good movie. In large part, if you want to talk about nuance, speaking of, in contrast to Black Christmas, and this is why I respect the Halloween of 2018 so much. Halloween Kills is much more of a slasher and much more connected to the first film in tone, but Halloween 2018 offered this really sophisticated take on PTSD. I thought that was so realistic to where someone in real life would be. In fact, I brought up a situation with that movie in particular. It was weird. I'm like, Halloween's actually realistic fiction. Like, there was literally an incident in 2020 in Washington State with an individual who, as I brought up before, there's a real parallel between her story, which was, I'm sure, a nightmare she expressed, and this movie where Laurie Strode has been in a trauma state for 40 years, waiting for Michael Myers to reemerge. I'm not kidding. It was an exact parallel to the point that, my respect for the film, which I already had watching it, on a first encounter, just grew insurmountably. See, that's a good example of nuanced social commentary and making a parallel, right, that feels very realistic to where we are. This movie, you read okay, again, it's a Blumhouse picture. So that's the first impression. Kevin Bacon is in this, and he's, of course, a very well-known actor, and he's also, been in previous Blumhouse movies. You Should Have Left, that film with Amanda Seyfried. That one looked good. I haven't seen it yet. Maybe better than this one. But you also see the potential here for, again, another film on social commentary. Right? Now, the direction that Blumhouse could take, especially in modern Hollywood fare, doesn't escape me with a film like this. But I could still see, perhaps, where this film's like, okay, we're making obviously a horror thriller movie, and this is, of course, a fictional story, but there's a parallel here. Because, oftentimes what it's brought up in conversation a lot these days, conversion therapy, right? People are very familiar with that concept because it still happens in our world today. But as far as a nuanced take is concerned, I don't think they/them is going to be as approachable, let's say, as Boy Erased. Whereas that movie, which I absolutely have a lot of respect for in many capacities, I don't entirely agree with its direction. Again, I stated, with no offense intended, I'm a Christian, so you perhaps understand maybe I operate from a bit of a contrarian mind, at least on some matters here. I have a lot of respect for the film in what it taught me about conversion therapy, to the point that I have a lot of concerns with it as well. I don't think this film is going to have that much of a nuanced take. I could be wrong. I've seen from the general pools, though, at least maybe my theory on this is right in line of what I'm thinking. This could probably be another Black Christmas. But I'm going to attempt 2 ads to best gauge it. I mean, generally, even speaking of the matters here, I mean, again, I would much rather watch Boy Erased again, because that film, and that was inspired by a true biography, actually, Jared Conley's real-life story. This is a fictional story, and my general impression is that it's not going to be as well delivered. The only reason, though, I'm even looking at this is I have a general acquaintance. I mean, I've never met him personally, but he and I, we follow each other on Twitter. He offered a private screening. I'm like, well, I'm kind of interested to hear. I'm only interested in watching them if I can hear your commentary. Anyway, if you know Mikey, you'd understand why. Hey, that's an appealing idea. Okay, maybe this is the only reason I'll watch it. Because otherwise, for me, it's like, it seems like another Black Christmas. And I don't know if I'm game for that, because again, that first film was a disappointment. Anyway, I'm going to start with the teaser. I'm going to go for the teaser and the trailer, and we'll see what the general articulation is here. But like I said, I don't think this is going to be a Boy Erased. I think this is going to be another Black Christmas. All right, here we go. Let me tempt fate, though. And it is on Peacock, so it's a pretty accessible release. And some of their fare doesn't necessarily get the best response. All right, I don't think the cards are in line for this movie. We'll talk more, of course, about it, I'm sure, after I get a better sense for the picture.
This is a safe space for everyone.
Oh, look, they put a slash line in. How adjacent to the title. Very cute. It's kind of a snappy trailer. I mean, again, in the way the marketing comes across. It seems like a very familiar teen energy.
Let's have some fun.
Slasher thriller. That was more just like a snapshot reel. I need a trailer to better judge it. Alright, let me cue that up. I mean, aesthetics-wise, looks fine, but I need a better sense of the story.
It's a great day to be alive, isn't it?
I'm thinking no. The logo's kind of cool, though. I'll give it that. I like the tree pattern in the lettering.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm guessing that some of you're not happy. Maybe you don't fit in. People make fun of you. Well, I can't make you straight, but you give us this week, and we might be able to help. Boys' cabin over there, girls' cabin over there.
I use they, them pronouns, as in they can't believe they're at this camp.
It's kind of a funny line, but you knew we were going there with the title.
Not being gay.
There's no judgments in this room.
Sometimes I wish I was invisible.
I would understand it a lot more if there was Bible thumping and queer bashing.
Do you even believe in any of this?
Come in, please.
Like Black Christmas, good marketing.
Do you think
At least in part. The style of the horror stuff. I mean, the lines in the actual film, I don't know.
Make yourself special. You become they. Today,
We're getting our truth or dare on with that smile.
Look how long they've been doing this.
It's time to play.
This could get a lot worse.
Where's my killer?
We need to get out of
Not
here.
even the string instruments are enough to tempt me.
Just enjoy the sunshine and work on your tan.
They/them. Streaming only on Peacock.
You know, the funny thing, too, is I saw a lot of blowback, at least when it was first advertised. And I did see a bit of, a pretty funny response. And people were generally like, I don't think there was much consideration of this being a good film. I think in particular because it is such a hot button issue in our world today. I'm sure you bore witness to. I mean, look at 2022. We're still, discussing the situation pretty adamantly. What I saw in the way of social media and response from the public, like I get some people were like, oh, we're going for representation here, and it's like they slash them. I remember seeing some blowback of like, what are you suggesting here? Like it just didn't seem to land that well. So I mean, it's a complex name. I get the irony. I get how this fits. In regard to the energy of the ad, there are certain elements here that are oftentimes used in horror marketing, but they're fun. And they're like, okay, this is tempts an engaging release. The narrative itself, I don't see the nuance here as much. Certain elements, and this is why I'll say I'm open, on the matter, speaking of conversion therapy. As I've said, I'm a Christian, so perhaps you can understand maybe my point of view, Bible believing, although, again, I don't mean to intend any offense by this, personally. Boy Erased taught me a lot about conversion therapy, and I had heard stories preceding my viewing of that movie. In fact, speaking of Boy Erased, I've mentioned in the past with films that I haven't covered. I started this channel, I started with like big franchises, and since then I've really broadened my lens to other fare. It doesn't mean I've stopped covering, bigger commercially known movies. I just have wanted to expand my division because in particular regards like independent movies and smaller films, I oftentimes see more sophisticated work and artistic projects that yearn more to be revered. Boy Erased, I truly regret not covering that because I think my voice would have been valuable in the realm of social discourse as a Christian with considerations on the subject. Now, before I go into explaining maybe my point of view of the movie, I will differentiate, I think, an important contrast. I'm not going to take a broad brush when I say conversion therapy to individualized therapy with a licensed clinician that's voluntarily chosen on behalf of maybe an individual, or if we're speaking about a child, perhaps a parent on their behalf. That's not what I'm speaking about. That type of therapy, because I think sometimes people think of conversion therapy, broadly speaking, they're like, oh, any type of therapy to change romantic inclinations, right? That's, if, let's say, somebody who's voluntarily seeking mediation on part of a counselor, who's licensed, I consider that very important, somebody who's an expert in the field of not only this particular subject matter, but psychological well-being and health. Because as somebody who, not necessarily along these lines directly, but as somebody who has been in his own psychological struggles to different subject matters and has been in the realm of a counseling setting. Not entirely. I mean, I've been with a therapist, and I have a pastor I've met with, personally, just on counseling matters, and both of them are great. I wouldn't speak ill of them in either way. But preceding that, I've had poor counseling experiences with somebody who was unlicensed, and in many ways was not a good fit, who I should not have regarded as a counselor, or I won't go further than I need to on this, but anything more significant than that. Anyway, it was just not a good environment for me. It actually led to a lot of further complications. maybe I'll speak on the more of that one day, but I understand. And also somebody who's studying in psychology. I mean, I majored in writing and English, but I'm actually doing a double major right now in psychology because I have an ambition to be a counselor, or just to even, not necessarily even be, I mean, I haven't made up my mind. I mean, I don't even know if I necessarily want to work in the counseling profession, but I've always had a yearning to understand psychological health. I think in particular because of what I've been through in many aspects of my life. I understand the value of good counseling, right? And certain aspects are necessary, especially in the realm of something as sensitive as like romantic inclinations and personal struggles in the area that they/them is focusing on. One-on-one therapy with somebody, again, who's an expert on the subject matter and who understands how to, in a healthy manner, mediate a situation with an individual seeking voluntary therapy or counseling or consideration, or just someone to have a conversation with, someone who's obviously you would put your trust in, and you understand that there aren't going to be, I mean, everybody maybe has, you sometimes maybe a counselor may not be the best fit, but somebody who's an expert in the arena of what you're seeking help with, that's very important. I would say it's critical to therapy. I am not speaking of one-on-one licensed therapy when I say that I have a lot of considerations on conversion therapy as a whole. Boy Erased, when I think of conversion therapy in regard to what I have a lot of criticism of, it's the ruralized, at least from my perception, loosely attached to Christian organizations with very poor oversight and regulation, and not a lot of efficacy. Boy Erased painted a very disturbing picture in regard to what happens when therapy is administered in a wrong fashion. And I would say conversion therapy is depicted in that movie, and as it's on my bucket list to read his book. I haven't done it yet. I have so many books I gotta read. It takes me so long to get around to reading. It's easier for me to watch a movie, but Jared Conley's story. Again, I deeply respect the authenticity of Boy Erased because it taught me a lot. But I haven't read the book yet. I really want to understand the depth of Jared Conley's point of view because he went through conversion therapy. That whole film, as I said, is a biographical interpretation. And it's made by Joel Edgerton, which helps. He's an absolutely fantastic filmmaker. The experience of conversion therapy that was depicted there on that film was deeply disturbing and fell right in line to stories I've heard of people who come out of that, where I've realized pretty quickly this is not a viable therapy option. Boy Erased offered a very nuanced and dark, realistic take on the horrors when therapy or counseling, especially in the name of spirituality or religion or Christianity, is not managed well. And I'll say just even in the root idea of conversion therapy, again, as a Christian, we can't convert people directly. It's like I, as an unrighteous person, can't convert someone else into a righteous state, right? I can't convert you to be a certain way. I can advise you, I can encourage you, I can come alongside you and listen to your story, but, and that, okay, there's so many points I could jump on in terms of conversation. I'm trying to keep it as simplified and as streamlined as I can, but the approach of conversion therapy does not work in regard to what's pictured on Boy Erased, what's seen here. Now, this is obviously, like Boy Erased, depicting a horrific take, which I'm fine with that, because I think it does communicate the realism of what someone goes through in that particular mode. Like I said, I want to be very clear in the distinction I'm setting so people don't get that detail mixed up. I'm not speaking of conversion therapy as like all therapy across the board. You need to draw a distinction here. I'm also not opposed, of course, to, I would say, one-on-one conversation, if done amicably and reasonably. You know, whenever I think about this in regard, I'll say this from, not to go too detailed on this point, because I don't really want to yet. There's a time and season for everything. But I have a little more familiarity with, not just from watching Boy Erased, and not just speaking of conversion therapy, I have a familiarity with subject matter more so than I voluntarily let on. more than most people in my personal life would even know. So I deeply understand, as best as I can put it, the sensitivity of the subject matter and focus here. And I'd say, again, like I said, the one-on-one therapy is not what I'm speaking of in regard to conversion therapy and my criticism. I would also say one-on-one conversation. Sensitivity. And I know that word probably it's maybe not the best word choice. I'm not saying that in any way to be disrespectful. I'm saying it just by the essence of the situation. The subject matter that they/them surrounds is very sensitive in nature because it is such a delicate issue for people's lives and just in social conversation. It's a walking on broken glass type situation, maybe in society in regard to what we're discussing right now. It needs to be treated with delicacy. One-on-one conversation can be very therapeutic and cathartic, right? For example, I always think of a story. My pastor, who he'd hate that making a bit of an altar of him in this case, but he's one of the most humble men that I've ever met. He's also one of the kindest and probably most open men in regard to conversation that I've met in my life, which is great because I don't necessarily have the best track record of pastors. Anyway, in regard to personal relationships, it just necessarily hasn't worked out the best for me. Anyway, that's a side point. I won't go further with that one. There's a lot I could say that kind of stems off from this conversation. Anywho, I will refrain. You don't need a woe is me conversation in this case, but well, I can go there, but I'm not going to. Anyway, my pastor told the story a while back, and maybe I'm mixing up elements of this because my pastor has stressed the value of learning people's stories across the board. He mentioned the story this one time. I think he was on an airplane. He said he was just preaching on a Sunday morning one day, and he said that he was sitting next to just some lady that he met that day. And he is a conversationalist. I mean, from what I know about him and what I've known him for a couple of years, he definitely engages with people pretty easily. So he made a point of starting a conversation with the person he's sitting next to, because you're going to be on a plane for a couple hours. I'm sure he's probably doing, I don't know why he was on the plane, maybe like missionary work in another country, but he oftentimes travels. And as the two were sitting next to each other, at one point he, I guess in the midst of their conversation, just said, I guess this is how he perhaps approaches ministry, but he said at one point, tell me your story. I'm sure in his case, it wasn't necessarily authoritative, like, oh, tell me your story. I demand you tell me about yourself. No, I know the guy, of course, he's very cordial. So I'm sure it's like, well, tell me about yourself. What makes you you? Where have you been in life? That's just how he starts conversation. And that's always stuck with me ever since he first, discussed that in regard to how we approach talking to people in ministry, right? And I would apply that here as an effective tool. Not only for, of course, I say as a Christian ministry purposes, I think that certainly adds a more enticing layer to somebody engaging with you and maintaining a conversation where you could have more of an impact in encouragement and advisory position. But I think it does something for the individual as well and focus too, because they feel like they can approach you. For a subject matter, even for example, something related to what they them is depicting in regard to conversion therapy or romantic inclination, I prefer to use that term over, because I've heard some blowback in regard, I know sexual orientation is the more attributed term, but I've heard some people say, that they don't necessarily consider that term to be the most respectable. So that's why I say romantic inclination, just out of, I'm only clarifying it so you understand maybe why I'm saying it that way. Out of respect, just, for everybody involved in this case. Because I know, from what I've heard, again, I'm trying to find the best term possible. It basically means the same thing, at least in my opinion, in the way I've seen it. But for subject matter related to this, that's what people need in regard to an approachable dialogue. That's what good therapy will do. That's what a good therapist, not necessarily somebody who's operating from a perspective, again, I truly believe in regard, especially to this subject matter, licensure and experience are very important, as well as the person, but you need to feel like you can trust your therapist, right? And that you can have a communication with them, and you're not necessarily put in a position of awkward, I'm trying to find the best word to describe this, because again, I'm thinking back on my own experiences. You shouldn't feel necessarily threatened or demeaned or bullied. I won't go further with that one. Anyway, you need to make sure that the person that you're meeting with, whether they be just somebody who's, coming alongside you having a conversation with about sensitive matters like this, or a licensed therapist you're seeking some sort of psychological and healthy consideration, right? You want to make sure that the person is operating in sound judgment and that they truly care about what they're saying, right? They care about the individual. Conversion therapy, in the sense, again, of this rulized approach with poor oversight, faulty methods. Again, I base my observation of this on Boy Erased. And I'll tell you, my experience watching that movie, if you've never seen it and you want to understand more about conversion therapy from an inspired take, again, that's based on a real-life story, I was gripping my chair as I was watching. I'll tell you, I hated this chair. Maybe that's in part because I just wanted to destroy the chair. In part, I could have, with my response to that movie, if I grabbed the wooden arms hard enough, I could have destroyed it. That chair killed my back. It's been in previous videos. I hate that chair. Anyway, it's the only one I had, though, because I was cheap. IKEA makes good furniture, but that chair sucked. Anywho, it was like at the end of the movie, and I won't spoil it, just for those of you who may want to watch it. Again, it's a very surreal look at conversion therapy, and it's largely fueled my perception of why I'm so antagonistic to the idea as it's perceived here. But I was literally gripping my chair in anger at the end of the movie, because watching what was being done, not only in the name of restoration, on an issue such as romantic inclination and the personal self, but in the name of the church and God, really angered me. No one should be physically hurt or beaten to the point of suicide. And that's what was depicted in the movie. It's like a horror movie. It wasn't just even a horror movie. It was just so wrong on its face. It enraged me. And that was the point. Because it's like, I'm watching, it's going, hey, I'm a Christian over here. I made that obvious. And this is the completely wrong approach to take. Anywho, it was such a bad idea. That film is nuanced. That's a roundabout way of, going about my point here. But I'm trying to lay a baseline here for where I'm going with this. That was a very nuanced take. And if you perhaps want to understand a film that is themed around showcasing the disturbing nature of conversion therapy when it's not done right, or even just in the name of conversion therapy, again, I have a lot of criticism on the very idea of, we can convert people to be in a better state. You are an unrighteous person. You can't make somebody righteous. You can be an agent for righteousness, but that restoration comes from God. It doesn't come from you. And your methods are faulty, at least as presented with that movie. I don't see nuance in they, them. Or they/them, whatever the name is. I mean, it's easier. If people call it they, them, because it's like, well, that's what's commonly, talked about. If you'd like a better introduction in regard to the harm of conversion therapy, and this is, again, largely fueled based on the reviews I've heard spoken of for other people for they, them, even though I would say film is subjective. It's been across the board. I've seen from both critics and audience members. And when there's an overlap, you're like, okay, sometimes I don't always buy critics' responses, but when there's an overlap, I'm like, it doesn't seem like maybe this is the camp for everybody. If you want a nuanced take in regard to conversion therapy, and perhaps why I, especially after watching the movie, consider it to be, again, the ruralized approach, not one-on-one licensed clinician therapy with a good therapist, and of course, a voluntary consideration. I'm speaking again of the loosely attached, ruralized, poor oversight, poor curriculum, and effective program statistics. Even you could just look at personal stories I've heard of people who've, gotten out of conversion therapy, and it doesn't seem to have helped. I mean, it's just practice itself to seem like, why are we even doing it if there's no solution, right? Why keep it up? Go look at Boy Erased. I don't think they, them is going to have the same consideration. I mean, again, I like Blumhouse fare, but I just don't see it with this movie. But what are your guys' thoughts with they/them? Maybe you disagree. And I tried my best to give you a summation perhaps on why exactly I am so impassioned on this subject. Like I said, I have regrets in not covering Boy Erased. I do feel that conversation on conversion therapy, and maybe I'm not expressing everything here. Perhaps, sometimes I post a video or I'm recording, I'm like, when I'm editing, I'm like, I wish I'd said this or that, I make these points. So if there's anything else to articulate, of course, I'll probably put that in the comment section down below. But I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, maybe on maybe what you consider. But I try to give a very amicable take. Again, speaking as a Christian, I have my perspective and my worldview based on biblical teaching, but no personal animus is intended. And speaking of, again, Boy Erased, that's a movie that will make you think, and it's a movie that it's hyper realistic. It will make you angry. It will make you sad, but that's the intention because, you know, that's the reality. That's really the large part I consider and why I covered they/them. Again, let's get the name correct here, even though it's so easy to mix this up. It's because, you know, again, I guess it's sort of like a relapse of, you know, hey, I regret not covering Boy Erased. Let me make up for it with a lesser tier movie, but it's a doorway. Let me know your thoughts on what you think about they/them as well. And again, like I said, if you have any thoughts on maybe some of the considerations I proposed, you know, regarding conversion therapy, I'd love to hear maybe your point of view down below, whatever your thoughts are. And if I have anything to add after editing this and maybe I forgot about, because I'm sure in my case I will, I'll incorporate that down below in the comment section. I definitely see this as an ever Black Christmas, which is sad. You know, again, I like Blumhouse fare, but Black Christmas was such a disappointment. Maybe at some point, you know, again, it's not out of the realm of possibility for Blumhouse to make a very respectable and realistic horror film. Halloween 2018 was that with PTSD. I didn't think Black Christmas was that. It's certainly not the Me Too angle. It was like, it just was not well handled and it wasn't a good quality movie. Not even on a horror film it was good. Again, that Up in the Frat House, that set the expectation like really low. Like when that came up, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is not going to be good. And you got Carrie Elways in the casting. It was so bad. I kind of see the same energy with they/them. I don't see a nuanced take. I do think at some level it won't be as approachable of a release. I mean, this is like so typical among slasher fare. I mean, not even Black Christmas had the advantage of being a tempting representation. This is kind of like just traditional slasher fare. It just doesn't really bring me in. I'm like, I've seen this type of film before. But again, knowing and being familiar with Blumhouse in regard to socially conscious horror thriller fare, and based on the reviews, I don't think I'm missing much sitting this one out. I think I'd much rather watch Boy Erased. Focus Features did a much better job, in my opinion, than Blumhouse seems to have. But that's just my take. Thank you so much for watching this video. Before you bounce, feel free to drop a like and comment, subscribe to this channel with a ding on the bell, and share this video with your friends. And consider checking out the description here. There you'll find links to my other channels, as well as addresses to my other social media accounts and ways you can help support my work if you feel so inclined. May God bless you, and looking forward to when our paths cross again.